All right. Good morning, everybody. It is now 9 o'clock. I would like to call to order the Big C meeting for Wednesday, April 30th, 2025. Please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, we'll start off with our roll call, and we'll go to my left. So my name is David Will. I am the president of the Big C and also the mayor of Reddington Beach.
I'm David Tagliarini, Commissioner for District 1 of Madeira Beach.
I am Tammy Vasquez, Vice Mayor of Treasure Island.
Adrian Petrola, Mayor, Sandy Beach.
There we go.
Good morning, Barry Rubin, Pinellas Beaches Chamber.
Good morning, Heather Davidson of Pinellas Beaches Chamber.
Good morning, Sam Jenkins with SPC's Institute for Strategic Policy Solutions.
Christopher Hollins, citizen, Paso Grove.
Carla Bowling, resident of Indian Shores and mortgage lender.
Good morning, Katie Mastenbrook, Florida Sea Grant.
That's okay.
Didn't know the order.
Christy Herrig, resident, Reddington Shores.
Jan Wilson, Vice Mayor, Indian Rocks Beach.
Hillary King, Commissioner, Indian Rocks Beach.
John Moorlight, Deputy Chief, Madeira Beach Fire Department.
Clint Belt, Fire Chief, Madeira Beach Fire Department.
Bob Schmidt, Bel Air Shore.
Here, let's get these two.
Lindsay Johannesson, I'm with the Florida League of Cities and the FMIT.
Renee Rose, City Clerk, City of Bel Air Beach.
Let's just start right here.
Good morning, Charlie Justice, Tampa Bay Beaches Chamber.
Joey West, Bay News 9.
Good morning, CJ Hoyt, Commissioner, Reddington Shores.
Margaret Carey, Town Clerk, Reddington Shores.
Good morning, Melissa Folds, Deputy Clerk of Reddington Shores. Thanks.
I'm not sure how I got this job.
Fred Irwin, Sandkey Civic Association, and Clearwater had a town hall meeting. They were probably beat up last night, our council, so that's why Clearwater's not represented here today.
Ashley Giovanetti, Pinellas County Communications.
Good morning, Nicholas Menscheiss, Council Member, Indian Shores.
Tina Porter, Town Administrator, Indian Shores.
Ellen Bauer, Vice Mayor, Indian Shores.
Mike Howard, Counselor for Indian Shores. Nice turnout for Indian Shores.
Adriana Neves, Town Clerk, Town of Reddington Beach.
Megan Blanchard, Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council.
Randy Moore, just some guy.
Jay Super, Mayor, North Reddington Beach.
Tom Capper, Mayor of Reddington Shores.
Diantha Shear, Mayor of Indian Shores.
Denise Hausberg, Mayor of Indian Rocks Beach.
Good morning, everyone. Dave Gaddis, Mayor of Bel Air Beach.
All right, I think that's everybody. Moving on, does anyone have any changes to our agenda today? Or if not, can we get a motion
I'll
for
make a
approval?
motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. And has everybody looked through the minutes, and can we get a motion to approve our minutes from our last meeting?
I'll make a motion to approve that.
I'll second.
Right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. All right, moving on to our treasurer's report, Commissioner Tangaretti. Now, he was filling in for Mayor Brooks, and he had no idea he was going to give this report today, so.
Fortunately, it's not very complicated. It's almost flat. We had March 1st, we had a beginning balance of $1,039.19. No deposits, one expenditure, disbursement, $69.03 as a gift from Mayor Bill Queen, North Reddington. It was a lovely glass sculpt from Amazon. And the ending balance, $970.16.
Thank you very much. That's excellent. Can we get a motion to approve the treasurer's report?
Motion to approve Treasurer's Report.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, nice job. All right, now, next up is our legislative update. So as you know, the legislative session was supposed to end soon. It seems like it might be extended a little bit. We don't know. But there's a lot of things going on up in Tallahassee that are going to affect us, especially as small communities. And I know we're all very busy putting our towns and our own homes back together. But this is very important what's going on up in Tallahassee. This is going to affect your community. And Randy Moore is here to break down some of the bills that are being proposed and how they will affect us. Please take it away. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mayor. Randy Mora, despite my tongue-in-cheek comments a moment ago, I'm the city attorney in Bel Air Beach, in Indian Rocks Beach, and in Pinellas Park. I also serve as panel counsel with the Florida Municipal Insurance Trust and Florida League of Cities. Great to see Lindsay in the audience today. With that, I've been asked to speak on the current ongoing legislative session. In short, there's no maybes about it. The Florida legislative session will not end on time. The session is supposed to end this Friday. It will not end. The reason that the session will not end on time is we have what I would call a 3-comma chasm between the House and the Senate versions of the budget. What I mean by that is, as many of you may recall from civics or just general understanding of our legislative process, when the House passes something, the Senate has to pass something in identical form that gets sent to the governor signs or vetoes it. As it relates to the budget right now, there is, at least publicly stated, a $3 billion difference between the House version of the budget and the Senate version of the budget, and that 3-comma chasm will not be breached in the next 48 hours. The secondary effect of that, and that's happening because of the tension between the House, Senate, and executive on priorities and allocations, but understand that budget negotiations almost inherently concern policy. And so changes in the budget will almost certainly change policy. And so we're in a weird posture this session. Normally I would come to you 48 hours toward near the end of session, 72, I'm losing track, I don't know, or within a week after and say, here's what's passed. Here's what we know is happening. We have more questions than we have answers out of this legislative session at this point. There are not dozens of bills that have been passed in both chambers. There are several bills that have been passed by the House and several that have been passed by the Senate. Some have been passed by the House, sent to the Senate, or vice versa, amended, and then they have to go back because now they don't match. And so there's not as much certainty as I'd like to give you and say, here's what you should at least be preparing for, even in this fluid, these fluid shifting sands, no pun intended on the beaches. So as we talk about that, let's talk about some of the major legislative priorities and discussion that's happening and give some indications there. I would say chief among the issues is taxes. No surprise when you're talking about local government and state government that taxes are a key issue. There is the House approach to taxes and tax relief. They want to cut sales tax from 6% to approximately 5.25% in the House approach to things. The Senate's approach would be instead to extend the tax holidays and eliminate taxes on things like clothes and shoes that are under sales taxes specifically, under $75. Some context for all of that, by the way, there are 5 states in these United States that currently forego a statewide uniform sales tax. Those are Alaska, Delaware, Montana, New Hampshire, and Oregon. California is the highest, so we're at 6%. California is at 7.25. The next 4 states that are in second place are at 7%. If you were going by ranking highest, Florida's pretty much close to the middle at 17th with its 6% sales tax. When you roll in local taxes, we end up right in the middle at 25%. And these numbers are based on data provided by the Tax Foundation, one of these, non-governmental agencies or entities that lobbies and monitors these kinds of things. So the state approach is to go down to 5.25. They don't have harmony on what they're going to do about taxes. That happens against the backdrop of what has been stated more statewide about the possibility of eliminating or substantially limiting ad valorem taxes, which is a potential existential threat for your current operations, which is a fancy way of saying you rely on your ad valorem taxes to fund your municipal budgets. If they are gone tomorrow, you will have to find a new revenue source or means or find a way to or services that you're going to cut. Often when we talk about tax cuts, it's very easy. Everybody in the room is going to say, yes, I want to pay less money out of my pocket to the government or to anyone for that matter. Tax cut discussions are often decoupled from spending discussions. At the local level, your challenge is going to be keeping those things at the forefront together as that discussion happens. This is particularly relevant because just yesterday, Speaker Perez of the House announced a select committee that would study over the next, I think, 3 quarters, a series of issues to present 5 questions ultimately as proposed constitutional amendments for the consideration of the electorate. And the things that they're going to study and propose and potentially structure, the questions being posed, the 5 House proposals for property tax reform, all of which will require a constitutional amendment, include 1, requiring every city, county, and special district to hold a referendum on the elimination of homestead property taxes. 2, creating a new $500,000 homestead property tax exemption for non-school property taxes. That $500,000 exemption would be increased to $1 million for homeowners who are over 65 years of age or who have had a homestead in Florida for over 30 years. 3, authorizing the state legislature to raise the amount of the homestead exemption by state statute. 4, enhancing Florida's assessment limitation caps for homestead and non-homestead properties. We could change the homestead assessment cap from 3% per year to 3% every 3 years. For non-homestead assessments, we would adjust the cap from 10% per year to 15% every 3 years. And then the 5th question to be examined and discussed is prohibiting the government from foreclosing on a homesteaded property for unpaid taxes. So those are the measures, and that press release, by the way, from Speaker Perez was released just yesterday. So when I come up to you and I say, we're trying to figure things out on the move in terms of what's going on, and when you're asking your city attorneys or potentially your lobbyists or legislative partners, hey, just give me the cliff notes, what do I need to know? I don't know. There's a lot of uncertainty right now. And so the creation of that issue is, I think, at the forefront of this discussion. And I think, and the proposal is to have those before the House or for the 2026 session. So understand that while the event horizon is not tomorrow, it is coming, and you folks will have to decide for yourselves how your policies align with those proposals and how you choose to engage in that process and discussion. You know, again, I would just reiterate, as you have discussions with your constituents, with your legislators, with policymakers about tax cuts, remember again the ease with which that is often decoupled from the context about spending. What are we going to do about the beloved library, the fire station, the police department, city hall, the beach renourishment that you do or cleaning? All the services you provide are largely based on ad valorem taxes. Of course, you have Penny for Pinellas that helps with some capital improvements, and you have a few other small revenue sources, but your base revenue source is ad valorem. So as you're cutting that, understand that's necessarily going to mean changes in how you operate. So those are some of the one of the bigger issues. There is also getting to some of the legislative bills themselves. Moving on from the budget discussion, I think one of the foremost bills that would be of particular concern in these coastal communities are House Bill 1535 and Senate Bill 180. And those bills have to do with the amendments to local operation regarding emergencies and emergency relief and response. There is the Senate bill is sponsored by our local representative, or senator rather, Senator DeSigley. The House bill is House Bill 1535. The Senate bill, prepared by Senator DeSigley, passed the Senate 37-1 on April 9th. The House bill passed, I believe, just yesterday, or in the last week, and is substantially different from the Senate bill, which means they are not harmonized, and they're going to have to figure it out. There's a lot of things in the bill. The Senate bill talks about studying the implementation of burdensome or restrictive land development regulations following such emergency things, so studying the ability of governments to adapt and adopt land development regulations following storms. There's a number of other measures in there, and I'm not going to go through it exhaustively because I don't want to give you too much of what may not even apply. The other part of it is the House bill. One of the main differences between the House bill and the Senate bill is on the point that I just presented, which is the Senate bill calls for a study to be done by OPAGA, which is the research arm of the legislature, to study what governments can and should be able to do following storms when you're changing land development regulations. Say, hey, we learned from this, now we're going to make it so you can't do X. I'm not going to propose anything so I don't end up on the evening news tonight. So there's that tension. The House bill says, no, we don't need a study, just ban it. Prohibit it, preempt it. So the House bill eliminates the study and just prohibits moratoria or more burdensome land development regulations. And for those of you who have been serving since we went through Hurricanes Ian and otherwise, you may remember Senate Bill 250 from 2 years ago that prohibited us from adopting any land development regulation that was more burdensome or restrictive within 2 years after the hurricane made landfall. Well, the challenge with that is almost inherently anything you do that changes your rules is more burdensome because you are a responsive body most of the time in your legislative capacity. You identify a problem and find a solution. You don't have solutions in search of problems. And so when you're trying to adapt, if you can't do anything more burdensome, restrictive, it presents a real issue. On top of that, if you did, at the time that legislation was adopted, there was language to say if you adopt it and it's challenged and you stand behind it, then you're going to have to pay the other side's attorney's fees. So it's not enough to say we in good faith believed that this was not more burdensome. It was just a change. If it was more restrictive, it was de minimis. So let's say you say, easy example, we're going to change the permissible landscapes and eliminate AstroTurf or eliminate loose mulch. The loose mulch filled our storm debris system. The AstroTurf pulled and didn't drain sufficiently, or whatever kinds of things you identify or limit how you do that. Well, that's more restrictive. Now, is somebody going to not build in your community based on that alone? Likely not, but it is a land development regulation. It is different. There are less things you can do, which meets the definition of restrictive, so you can't do that, right, in the 2 years following that. So these kinds of restrictions really fetter your ability to do a lot of legislating post-storm or to adapt to the realities that you're encountering. So that's where that fight is happening between House Bills 1535 and Senate Bill 180. It's not clear, based on the current divide between the House and Senate on other issues, on if those bills can be harmonized or will be harmonized, but it is one we will be following very closely, especially for the Big C and otherwise. Excuse me. There's another one that may have an impact. Another bill that may have an impact here is Senate Bill 1664, which is presently not presently right this moment, but on the Senate floor. It narrows local authority over tourist development taxes and may limit funding sources for coastal infrastructure as a result, right? Because if we can't tax, then we can't get the revenues, and that's how we have historically used those revenues in this area. What it does, among other things, is provides that existing taxes have to go to referendum again if they haven't already. Well, they should have already, but would have to go to referendum again to be renewed by January 1, 2033, so 8 years, or whenever that tax is set to expire if it has an expiration date. So basically, yes, you put it before the voters, yes, they approved it, make sure they're still cool with it and go back out on that. It also requires that if such taxes are being used to fund bonds or any kind of municipal financing like that has to be disclosed, I believe, as part of the ballot language itself. I'd have to check where that disclosure is required and, again, what that language looks like when it's adopted. The House version of that bill passed 62-45 on April 25th. So it remains to be seen if the Senate will adopt the House's version amended on the floor. But again, local option taxes and emergency legislation is another one to monitor. And at the risk, I could wax poetic, but just in the one other bill or two other bills I'll highlight. Live Local. You've all heard of it. What it is a mystery to most people, including the people who have to interpret and apply it. Live Local creates certain development entitlements, notwithstanding some other restrictions in your land development codes. For example, in its current iteration, not the one that's being talked about in Tallahassee right now, if you're within X zoning district, you are entitled to the maximum height of within, I think it's like 1 mile or X amount of miles, I can't remember the number now, regardless. And all of this is towards affordable housing. Affordable housing has its own amorphous definition. It certainly makes for good copy, but that doesn't mean it's all going towards what you might think affordable housing is. It's certainly creating more residences in the state of Florida where residences are needed, and finding ways to get in where you fit in, if you will, and being a little more liberal where we fit in. Things like live local, preemptions on short-term rentals, preemptions on home-based businesses, all of these sorts of things are changing the landscapes of our communities. So when you are met with residents, constituents, shareholders in your community who express outrage over what happened to zoning, what happened, why is this allowed next to my house or right down the street? Our approach to zoning has fundamentally changed from a regulatory standpoint in the state of Florida. Historically in the law, we have what we call Euclidean zoning. That comes from a Supreme Court case for the city of Euclid, EUCLID. And so Euclidean zoning is what most of us came to understand, that Richard Scarry idea of Richard Scarry is an illustrator if you don't know and don't have grandkids, but the idea that like City Hall's over here, the industrial park's over there, the houses are way over there. That sort of idea of Euclidean zoning has become much more fluid through Live Local and other regulations, and so we're seeing the landscapes of our communities change. When you get to the Live Local bill, the Live Local bills that are going on, there was a House Bill 943, which made it to the House floor, but then was laid on the table yesterday. It, I think, merged, because I couldn't even find the bill language and amendments of all the activity that happened yesterday. I believe it may have merged with House Bill 1730, which passed the House yesterday, 109-3. Suffice to say, Live Local was an effort that started roughly 4 years ago from the legislature, and each year they keep trying little fixes, and each year we try to figure out what those mean. But big picture, I can't tell you chapter and verse what that means, House Bill, Senate Bill right now. It's very, very fluid. And when you look at Live Local as a specific example, and especially at a lot of the legislation coming out of the House, what we've seen this session is a change in the approach to single subject bills. We've told you, I know I've told you, if you've worked with me, when you're doing legislation, it should have a single unifying subject. We're changing code enforcement, so we're not going to do, here's where we change code enforcement and allow for the pickleball courts or something, right? And change the hours of the pickleball courts. We're going to have those be separate things, so that you can track them and also vote based on one thing and avoid poison pills, as they say, and things like that. The House construct of the legislation this session has been very broad in single subject, so you're finding, okay, we're going to do Live Local, and we're going to merge in agricultural preservation and restoration, or whatever the terminology they're using today is. So they're taking things that might otherwise be considered disparate in past sessions and finding a unifying theme to say that it is in fact single subject. The last bill I'll highlight for purposes of the communities is there's Senate Bill 954, which passed the Senate on April 29th. I believe that's yesterday. It might have been 24th. My handwriting is not great. It passed 37-0. It requires local governments to adopt an ordinance for reviewing and approving certified recovery residences. While the term certified recovery residence is not itself defined, it's all part of the Florida statute 397.487, which provides a list of criteria to become a certified recovery residence. This was an outgrowth in part of the opioid epidemic in Florida, where you got all these mom and pop recovery centers that were really attempts to get Medicaid dollars and other things, and not necessarily operating in earnest in that way. And so they passed a legislative statutory scheme to say, if you're going to be a certified recovery center, this is what's a residence, this is what's going to be required of you. And so what they're saying is there has to be an ordinance in every city's books that would include a process for reasonable accommodation from any land use regulation that might prohibit the location of a recovery residence in your community. Now that's on top of fair housing requirements, which is the federal framework for that. So there's already some reasonable accommodation required under the law. This makes it so that your code has to specify what that process is. It doesn't militate a result, it militates a requirement to have a process. And so it would have to be, you would have to have the process for the reasonable accommodation consistent with the Fair Housing Act. It would require a written application. You would have to date stamp the application upon receipt. You'd have 30 days to tell them if they need more data, 60 days to resolve the application. It specifies application requirements. So it goes through, establishing a bureaucratic process or a due process. And it limits certain elements of the public hearing. There can't be any additional extra public hearing required. We're going to require you to have a charrette or some special brainstorming session, those kinds of things that get baked into these. By the way, there's already a preemption on the book that says a local ordinance or regulation may not further regulate duration or frequency of residents staying in a certified recovery residence located in a multifamily zoning district after June 30, 2024. That was passed last session. It interestingly has a sunset provision of July of 26, that language. My understanding of that is because there was a study being done by the legislature and they were saying, okay, here's going to be our stopgap. Once we have the study, we'll roll in what the preemptions will truly look like and what the regulatory scheme should be. So I know I've thrown a lot at you. The takeaway is we don't know, man. It's the budget process is ongoing. Like I said, there's that 3 comma chasm, the $1 billion difference. Conflicting reports on how close they are to resolving that difference, and what those legislative priorities that will flow from that difference are. Because as we often tell you when you get into budget season, which you will soon be, a budget is really a policy statement. It is your mission statement. Show me your budget and you will show me where your priorities are. And so from a legislative standpoint and otherwise. And so we're looking to that from the legislature as well. So that's it.
Wow, well, thank you. That was a great presentation, great information, and I'm sure we have a lot of questions for you. Dave, it looked like
I have no answers if I've not made that clear.
Yeah, so have you heard any news on just overall the sales tax cap that they were discussing?
So the news on that is the House and Senate are not aligned, right? That sales tax cap that they're talking about, the House is talking about bringing that down from the 6, to the 5.25. The Senate's looking at maybe we don't need to change the tax rate. Maybe we need to be more liberal or lenient in what it applies to and how long it applies in that. In terms of what the resolution will be, no, I do not know the answer on that at this point.
Right. Just seems that with the basically attack on funding in general, small communities like ours, they're not giving us alternative solutions.
Well, and the sales tax being a little distinct from being distinct from ad valorem, right? The reason, by the way, historically that we've had ad valorem, it goes back to the founding of the country because you could get revenue from a fixed location. We know this property will be here. We don't know if Dave's going to live here and vacation there and travel, but we know this property is going to be here and we can track its improvement and all of this. So that's been a long cornerstone of how we collect revenue at the local level, and obviously there are differing views on that, but the ad valorem discussion to me is I wouldn't say more concerning, but as a local government attorney, more concerning than the sales tax, which generally funds the state revenues. If you're looking at, which will have impact downstream on you as well, certain cuts will be made. The question is, how intent are we on governing rather than just, consolidating?
Well, and I think that's where I'm going with this. It looks like there's a big push, and they're becoming overly vocal about consolidation or dissolution completely of these small communities. And everyone here loves where they live, and they live there for a reason. So again, this is just another way of squeezing us out, it looks like.
While there's not an overt effort to, in terms of currently proposed legislation, to writ large eliminate municipalities, I think if you're paying attention, it's becoming increasingly challenging to maintain municipalities in Florida, and especially in communities like ours where you have, in Pinellas County, we have more than 20 cities. Some of them, a mile large, some several miles large. And that to some, the view has become that all government is big government and all government is bad. And so we just need to start cutting some government. Of course, we won't start with mine. We'll start with your unit. And so the concern becomes for you, especially when you have things like the post-storm relief on how do you continue, and people say, oh, well, look, community A did better than community B, and people compare and contrast and say, well, maybe we just don't need that one, Or maybe they all just become part of the county or the West Central Beach District, and it's easier to govern, and those sorts of things. Those kinds of possibilities certainly exist. There was a study last session to possibly consolidate beach communities in Manatee County, whether they rolled them into an existing city or the county themselves. And so, that theme is taking. You're hearing the quiet part said out loud. It's being said in session committee hearings. Maybe we just need less cities. We have 460 some odd cities in the state of Florida, and for some that's 460 some odd too many. For some that's maybe 200 too many. But whatever the number, it's going to mean a fundamental change to the landscapes of our communities. But I want to be clear, that's not proposed specifically in the session. I'm not saying that the legislature is eliminating that, but when you start adding all the regulatory and compliance measures, it becomes increasingly difficult to sustain and operate.
One of my concerns are we're losing a lot of homes. They're tearing them down, okay? So we're going to lose that tax dollar coming from that home, okay? And I understand it could be torn down today and it could be rebuilt another year, maybe 2 years, 3 years before we get those funds. Where do we get these funds for to take care of what we're losing?
Anybody?
It's a tough one.
I don't have a simple answer to that question, and that's one of the challenges. And that's, and it's interesting that you say that, because the question becomes, okay, we know we're going to lose some revenue, right? So let's take it to the individual level. What do we tell you? We'll save some money for a rainy day. You've had a few particularly rainy days, right? And so the idea is, well, what do you have in savings? What have you prepared for, knowing full well this day could come? But then there's also been legislative efforts in past sessions to say, you should have savings, but not too much savings. You're holding on to taxpayer money. So don't have too much savings either. We need to cap that. Has also been a discussion in the legislature. And so you find yourselves with these sort of Hobson's choices of how you're going to navigate that. I don't have an answer, and I say it, tongue in cheek, but part of it is what are your savings? What are your other funding mechanisms? Do you have to fund your other infrastructure? If you're having sewer, what impact fees do you have? What special assessments do you have? And I'm not suggesting some bonanza of fees and assessments, just saying you need to be looking at all your revenue sources.
Yeah, it bothers me because we're losing a lot of homes. We're
Yes,
being
sir.
knocked down already, okay? So that's why I brought up the question.
It's a valid question, sir, and a real concern, a tangible concern in your community.
Thank you.
I might be able to offer some. So we've done this. Well, I've done this assessment in our community. I've been a broker for 25 years, so I have a little bit of background in this. We've, out of the hurricane damaged homes that we've sold that we would consider tear downs, or it's roughly 100 homes so far that we've had. The 100 homes that we've had, 5 of them sold below their assessed value. The other 95 sold above assessed value by double and triple. Because you have to keep in mind, so many of them were homesteaded 20, 30, even 40 years ago. And so for the vast majority of the ones that we've seen that have substantial damage, complete damage, or being either tore down, rebuilt, raised, or whatever, almost every single one of them, I said 95% of them, are going to have an increase in the assessed value because they've sold for double and triple of what they were. So they were homesteaded, for example, at $250, and then they sold for $750 for lot value. Well, even if it's lot value, now it's $750, and in 2026, that's what it's going to get reassessed at.
Thank you, Mayor. More questions? Nobody?
I do have a couple of questions as well.
Of course, yes. Please.
So on going back to the property tax, every time you've mentioned it, you said homesteaded or non-homesteaded. So are we talking in 3 different categories? Are they looking to eliminate property tax on commercial property? Are they looking to eliminate property tax only on homesteaded property, residential? Or when they're talking about eliminating property tax and they're doing their study, which one of those 3 categories are they looking to eliminate, or is it all of them?
I think the answer is yes. No, I don't know, because it depends on who they is, right? Who the speaker, not Speaker of the House, who the speaker is. When you're talking about the public discourse in Florida, there's been this broader, do we need it at all, right? When you look at the speaker's priorities that I read into the record from his press release, and I encourage all of you to read it on its face, so without any characterization or perception of what I'm saying about it. most of what you saw there was targeted towards residences, right? Homesteaded, non-homesteaded, exemptions, that's residences, right? So the speaker, and most of the discourse is on giving the Florida taxpayer relief. I mean, you saw that in one of the questions on if you've lived in it 30 years, right? We want to help our longtime residents, especially those on fixed incomes, find some relief. So, you know, the discourse on what are they talking about, I think needs to start with defining, you know, the pronoun without the antecedent. What is the antecedent? Who is they? Who is they will change that answer. Right now, they, as the legislature, don't have an initiative before them on ad valorem changes. They have stated publicly policy goals to move in that direction. But I can't answer that definitively without seeing a proposed measure.
And then there was also Senate bill, the one that passed yesterday on rescinding the beach access. Sorry, where is it? The customary use.
So there's a statute on customary use. I don't know if that's passed both chambers. I have been tracking it loosely. I didn't make it part of my presentation today, in part because of how different those procedures were going.
My question was, let me clarify. So it did pass the Senate Bill 1622.
Familiar, yeah.
And then
did it pass the House in identical form?
It passed committee and it's going to the floor. Really, the question is, what impact would that have on our beach communities?
I don't know.
What did it look like before 2018?
No, I was getting there. I start with I don't know because I want to be honest, and I know that there's members, there's shareholders from a cross section of your community, and I don't want to be painted as the guy who said this is what it is. And understand, I litigate this issue, or my firm litigates this issue on behalf of cities. So when you're giving public comments like these, there's an awareness that everybody's listening. So the short answer is I don't know, and I would have to look at what's adopted. What I can tell you in terms of what happened before, in the before times, there was a general understanding that the beachlands were public property, and they were enjoyed under the public trust doctrine as a resource of Floridians writ large. And so you could traverse the beach without concern for being excluded from the beach, which you might see, for example, contrast that with parts of the Outer Banks and other areas in other states, though this does have national history, the public trust doctrine. And so what started to happen as we've seen this resurgence from the legislature and otherwise on asserting property rights are sacrosanct, people will be going to their deeds and say, oh, well, it says I own the property to the sunset. Some of you may have that in your deeds or your historical deeds. I own to the horizon, which you don't, even if it's in your deed. You do not own into the Gulf of Mexico. And so the question was, okay, if it's not the Gulf of Mexico, where is that line? And that's become the challenge. And so there started being some legal challenges and disputes in different communities, some most notably in the Panhandle, but also here in the Southwest Florida. And what that statute ostensibly did was establish the process by which those legal challenges would be resolved, and what a community needed to have done to have protected, preserved, or asserted that the existence of that historical use. And so a lot of communities were left scrambling during that session, and I believe it was the 2019 session. It might have been 2020, obviously anything COVID on is a fog. But in the last 5 years or so, communities were left scrambling to get something on the books that said, we've had customary use here, and so now that we have this ordinance, you have to go through this process. If it eliminates that, to me, it eliminates what that judicial process looks like or what the requirements are. I don't know that it solves the dispute because nothing really gets resolved until somebody wearing a black robe says so. So that's what I would say that way. Will it tomorrow allow you to go out and put up barriers or start removing things and have the authority of the law behind you? I doubt it. I think you're still going to have disputes about it, and then I'll reserve any other commentary beyond that.
Anybody else? Okay, you mentioned in the beginning, and we just touched on it a little bit, ad valorem taxes.
Yes, sir.
So, of course, nobody likes paying taxes. I don't like paying taxes. So has there been any discussion in the legislature regarding how to fund the essential services? We have first responders here with us today, and that's one of, our, as you said, that's where our funding goes to, those essential services.
I can't uniformly say that nobody's having that discussion or nobody's made those statements. I'm not aware of them. That doesn't mean they haven't been spread far and wide. You've had many a resident come to your meeting and say, I didn't know you guys passed this. And I was like, well, we were here with 500 people in the room last time.
Right.
Where were you? So I just want to start by saying, I don't know fully. What I can say is I've not seen an articulated plan on how that will be handled. And we can be students of history and look at, I think it was Prop 13 in California, Prop 2.5 that was in Massachusetts in 81, 82, where what they did, it's a fascinating case study. In Massachusetts back in 81 or 82, they had Prop 2.5. And what Prop 2.5 was a statewide proposition on taxes. It said we should cap ad valorem tax revenues for municipalities. And they did. What they said was your tax revenues cannot be more than 2.5% of your assessed values. So if you had $1 million in value, your tax revenues were $25,000. And that was the maximum you could collect. And then the maximum it could appreciate was an additional 2.5% year over year. And so that left communities eliminating firefighters, libraries, or trying to make those tough decisions. Ultimately, I think the way the state of Massachusetts resolved that was with repurposing the lottery revenues to municipal budgets. Fascinatingly, in New England, Massachusetts especially, the taxes go to, in Massachusetts go to, or rather the lottery revenues go to municipal budgets, as opposed to going to education and highways and these sorts of things you see in other states. So are there solutions? Possibly. What they are right now and what they'll be proposed, I'm not aware of them, especially in a state as large as the state of Florida. We are scales larger than Massachusetts. And that's a nearly 40-year-old case study. So I don't know what the plan is beyond adapt. And absent adapt, maybe you don't need to be here is the other thing, right? It becomes if you don't have sufficient revenue to sustain your operation, another potential possible is say, well, then maybe we don't need all these cities. And when we get scales and we say, these 5 cities together have enough and one of them doesn't, then maybe we just don't need that one city.
Well, my point is that we would be less concerned as a community if you knew there was a plan, we're going to remove those ad valorem taxes that you're using for your essential services, but here's the plan to continue those essential services.
I think
we
right
don't
now,
have that second.
I think right now, as you've seen at the federal level and even to a lesser extent in the executive branch with these DOGE measures, efficiency measures, we're looking to cut, and it's austerity measures is really what's largely being discussed. There's not a lot about how you implement that austerity. And to your point and your questions, it's not necessarily fully eliminating. Sometimes it's a cap or it's, modifying the exemptions. It will hit your bottom line. Even if they don't eradicate the ad valorem tax altogether, there will be a substantial change to your bottom line. And the question is going to become, how do you adapt? But I'm not aware of we're going to eliminate ad valorem because we found this fancy new whiz-bang thing, or we're going to give everybody 50 Bitcoin a day. I don't know.
Well, and then even with the discussion of consolidation, so we're still the same size county. We're still the Barrier Islands, and they still need essential services.
Right.
So somehow that has to be paid for.
Agreed.
So you know what I'm saying when they say that
somehow it has to be paid for. I think that
Okay.
the challenge that we're going to face is depending on where you sit on this policy discussion, the question is, does this require a fundamental paradigm shift, right? You're approaching it from the paradigm of how we've existed over the past, at least since 1968, when home rule became a thing in the Florida Constitution. So you got a good 60 plus years of data points or so, or nearly 60 years of data points. But is this that sea change moment where we say, maybe we operate differently and maybe it's less cities, maybe it's cities funding through different mechanisms, or, I don't see, in the discourse, I've not seen the proposed solution or the proposed alternative revenue source that, hey, cities, if you just do this, then you'll get by. Because understand the discussion is limiting your impact fees, limiting your special assessments, limiting your building permits. All these fees you collect have to have direct relationship to the cost, so they can't be revenue mechanisms. So the net result of that is likely the revenue goes down.
Thank you, sir. Also, accessory dwelling units.
Yes, sir.
I've heard a lot about that?
I've heard a lot about it as I prepared for today. I've reviewed that bill throughout session about, what some call the mother-in-law suite bill or the, accessory dwelling unit. I'm not prepared enough to speak on it from a place of knowledge in this moment.
Okay. You mentioned zoning earlier.
Yes, sir.
So, and I know there's a lot going on, and a lot of these bills don't match up. It's been a trend, and is that trend continuing where the local resident seems to have less voice and less input regarding the zoning in their own community?
It's a bit of a loaded question. I don't know that they have less input. It might be where that input is placed.
Okay, locally.
In terms of, there's less local control over what your community looks like than there was 20 years ago. And I don't think I'm saying anything radical when I say that, when you talk about the scope of the preemptions. And then again, not just the preemptions. For example, when we talk about live local, let's move it off the barrier islands, just to the main, let's put it in the middle of the state. When you talk about live local, if a developer comes to a community with a live local proposal and certain parameters are met and the city says we're still not doing it, there's a potential exposure to attorney's fees if there's litigation about that. Conversely, if a developer comes to the community and the community says, totally fine, let's do it, I think this works, and somebody challenges it from a comprehensive plan standpoint, a consistency challenge, the local government faces exposure to attorney's fees over that. So, okay, we worked with the developer. We did what we understood the law to require here. Oh, but did your comp plan harmonize? And so for local governments, you're left in this, I wouldn't quite call it paralysis, but a challenge on where you're going to put your priorities and take your risks. But as it relates to zoning, I'm not going to say you can't pass land development regs, but when we talk about more restriction, prohibiting more burdensome or restrictive, and you have preemptions on home-based businesses and preemptions on short-term rentals and preemptions, those mounting preemptions limit your ability to govern.
As Mayor Gaddis pointed out earlier, people have moved to these communities for a reason, because they wanted to be part of that community. And we're all different. We're similar, but we're different. Clearwater, Madeira Beach, Bel Air Beach. So when you say, where do we put our priorities? I believe we put our priorities in the actual resident. What do they want? You're saying like the developer wants to come in and do this, but then we have to see if the city wants to work. It's the residents have the ability to change their land use and zoning. So
it makes for a compelling discussion and narrative around it. I think the challenge is, I agree with you, the resident has the say. The resident has the say in who they put there, what they ask. When I say there, I mean in your local dioceses, or whatever the Latin plural is, and all your local councils, commissions, and alderman bodies. The challenge then becomes the locals also have the power to elect who's going to Tallahassee and speaking on their behalf there. They have power to select who's going into the executive branch. So we have power, and it really comes down to where we place our priorities when we go to the ballot box. And that's not an endorsement of anything. It's just saying, understand, there's always power. It's just where you're wielding it. Obviously, the government, we know all the maxims about the government that governs closest governs best. And it's also the one that has the most impact. It's frankly why in my career, I started my career going to law school in DC. I wanted to stay there. For various economic reasons, I did not. I came back, but I was always drawn to working in government. And what I enjoy about my practice, or have historically enjoyed about my practice, is that there's a real impact in what I do. When I'm asked to interpret an ordinance and I get something from my city commissioner, my city manager, there are certain times where I say, listen, I need to sit with this one for 3 weeks because I know full well my answer is going to change what your main corridor looks like 10 years from now. That's a real impact that you can have. And so that's tangible and that's real, and it's very easy when you get further up and further up to make a decision and not see that, or not see it as fast, and so it doesn't feel real. Oh, we didn't regulate enough because I went back to my district and I didn't see the change this session. It's like, well, yeah, you're going to see it. You're going to see it 3 and 5 years from now, but that's going to be beyond your term or beyond this seat. And so it's challenging. But the point you're making about the residents, yes, I think in this democratic experiment, we are called to rely on one another to make our voices known. And I'm sorry, I know I'm going on. I keep getting questions.
No, you're good. Well, that's an excellent point. And I always encourage that in all of these meetings for everybody here. Please make your voice known to your local commissions and your senator and your representatives. Please get involved and have your voice heard. Thank you, Randy.
Thank you, folks, and thank you for the indulgence of your time. Unless
I do have a question. One of the bills that was put forward, and I'm not sure whether it's passed or not, because last time I checked, it wasn't yet, was on the change in the amount on the a cap on how much we.
Thank you. I meant to speak to that. The sovereign immunity cap, I think, is where you're going.
That is exactly
Sovereign
it.
immunity cap. I meant to speak to that, and I appreciate. I had the note here. By all accounts, that effort is dead this session. Hey, anything can happen, right? But by all accounts, that is dead, and that is again a function of the division between the House and Senate. For those of you less familiar, when somebody sues a local government in tort, meaning I've been injured or something along those lines, not for a violation of constitutional rights, the maximum exposure for your city is $200,000. It's been that since approximately I want to say that took effect in 2011. Was when that changed. Before that, it was $100,000. And to get more than $200,000, there's a whole claims bill process you go through in the legislature. This session, they started out by saying we need to jump that from $200,000 to $1 million. Never mind that your policies didn't contemplate that, and your carriers didn't collect premiums based on that. But the idea was going to go to $1 million, and then after X amount of years, it'll go up even more and up even more, so that we don't get this sort of stagnation we're seeing at the recovery when people sue local governments. The House was and the initial version of the bill was also retroactive in its application, which was interesting. The Senate was wanting a more measured approach, if at all. It was saying we should raise it, but let's go to $500,000 now, $1 million in like 2030. The two sides have not been able to harmonize, and that seems to be on the list of things that's not going to make it out at this point. I've not seen a concerted effort to revive it. If there is, the session will extend. I think it'll be a couple weeks. And the question right now between the House and Senate is if we're extending session to do what? Obviously to pass the budget, but how much leniency are we giving ourselves to pass bills and adopt legislation during this time? Are we putting like we've seen special sessions, it's going to be just about housing taxes and this, so they can live local through, get those things through? I don't know. So that's the lingering question that's left based on that 3-comma chasm in the budget.
It would make a significant impact on our insurance liability.
Absolutely, it would. Were it to pass, and I can tell you we've seen that measure come back, if not every year, every other year. It may be dead this session. You'll see it again next year. I'm almost certain of it. Some version of it.
Well, thank you for that information. That was a great presentation.
I always appreciate being thanked for confusing news. Appreciate it.
Right, we have more questions and answers. All right, let's move down to discussion items. Does anybody have anything they'd like to bring up to the big C? Nothing? All right, we'll move to city events.
All is quiet, North Reading to Beach.
We have a chili cook-off tonight at our town hall at our pavilion. And that should be interesting with, I believe, our fire department is going to be judging. And we have, of course, our Memorial Day celebration or event on Memorial Day. And that's where all of the elected officials serve the picnic lunch, and we have the Memorial Day event, including the honor guard coming in. It's just a great event in our town, and it's been a tradition for many years.
Thank you very much.
We have a community garage sale going on Saturday and Sunday from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. So if you like discount shopping, come to Indian Rocks Beach this weekend. On May 18th, we're having Greentown Kids Beach Cleanup. It'll be from 10 to noon, and it will be staged at the City Park on 17th Avenue. Thank you.
We're pretty much quiet in Bel Air Beach. We're having a blood drive on May the 2nd, and there's a hurricane relief cabbie clothing event on May the 1st, and I think we're doing a beach cleanup on May the 3rd.
Well, all right. All is quiet in Reddington Beach.
On Madeira Beach, if you'll notice on your way out that we have our monthly market, Madeira Beach Market. Go by there and get some wonderful local crafts, locally grown things. It says in the agenda that fish fry and John's Pass Seafood event, March 28th. We did have that, and it was a huge success. Coming up, though, our big event is our 78th Founders Day celebration on May 3rd. This has become very popular to our locals. It includes live music, food, drink, and it's one of the events we kick in for fireworks. So, and it's right there on the water, so it's really a nice event. So that's what we've got going on for Madeira Beach.
Yeah, I don't want to. Great events, and I'm very happy to hear things are going on around our beach communities, and we've got some things coming up in Clearwater too. But I really feel like I need to take a minute just to ask you all to continue to pray for the Jose. Trying to remember his name, Leslie Castro family, the gentleman who was deceased on Sunday night, and there are still a handful, 6 or 7 folks still in the hospital recovering from injuries, so pray for their families. And then over and above that, there were many people who experienced that event on Sunday night who are still hurting badly. I talked with one of our fire department personnel on Monday, and I asked him, I said, well, how'd you sleep last night? And he said, I didn't sleep at all. And he shared with me the reality is we've got first responders here is our folks who rescue folks during hurricanes and see the things that they saw Sunday night. Those are pictures and images that they can't unsee. And those will hang with all those folks, whether you're a first responder or you're just a bystander there. We have many folks helping out their bystanders. So in addition to praying for the families of those who were injured, I'd ask for you to pray for those who in our community who came out for Clearwater. So proud of our Clearwater Fire and Police Department, the way they responded quickly. But it reminded me that we all need to pray for our first responders in all of our communities, because they never know when they're going to be called into harm's way and have to go in and do difficult work on short notice. But I am so thankful, and we're all thankful, that we have them there. And they performed exceptionally in Clearwater on Sunday night, and I know that we have first responders throughout the county, throughout the other beach communities that would do the same if needed. So continued prayers as we continue to help folks recover from the incident on Sunday night.
I'm glad you addressed that, and I'm sure, like everybody, you and your city are definitely in all of our prayers. That's a lot. We actually, in Treasure Island, it's seeing a little normalcy. We had a huge successful sports fest this last weekend behind the Bilmar. That was great to kind of see everybody back out on the beach, and all of our hotels that are open were full, so that was great to see. I'm sure a lot of you had some spillover from the people that were there. May is a little quiet in Treasure Island, but this Monday, VIP, they didn't know if they were going to be able to do it, but they are going to do their annual Cinco de Mayo party. It's going to be a little different, but they still are going to have live music out back. I'm sure it's going to be crazy there, but that starts at 3 o'clock on Monday. And then our fire department is doing something a little different this year. It's the first time they've done it. May 23rd from 1 to 3 o'clock along Gulf Boulevard, they are doing a walk to the beach day. And what this is going to be, there's going to be along Gulf Boulevard, there's going to be little segments where there's different first responders just kind of teaching. They're encouraging families to come out. They're planning on, just educating about the crosswalks and using the flashers, things like that. And just kind of a community event to get everybody out and to really try to educate on that, because even though we all have our crosswalks, about half the people, if that, use them, either use them or use the blinkers. So I think that's a great thing, and that's May 23rd from 1 to 3. And that's about it in Treasure Island.
All right. In St. Pete Beach, if you happen to be watching the Kentucky Derby this weekend, on Saturday we're having an event down in Paso Grill on 8th Avenue. We can come down and participate. Starts early afternoon. It's going to go all evening. I think the race is right before 7 p.m. So hope you all can stop by and check that out.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. That concludes our meeting. So with that, we are adjourned.
Thank you.